This information you are about to hear and perhaps view, these are not necessarily the thoughts or the ideas of Gary C.Clement or the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast. We are in no way, shape, or form affiliated with the parties this story is about or was interviewed for. Parts of this content may not be owned by or the property of the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast, G2 Network Media, or any other company we are affiliated with, and this information is strictly the opinion of those being interviewed. This content is for information purposes only, and although we may make reference to various news stories, we share our own independent beliefs about the content and provide our own opinions. Please enjoy the information. Welcome to the Gary Clement Radio Show and podcast. My guest today has a story to tell about his work in the community and is part of the civil rights movement. He's been involved with numerous organizations and has strong political views as well as strong religious convictions about our community, our state, and the nation. But due to a current situation with the NAACP, he can't speak much about it. But we are welcoming Reverend Curtis Gatewood. How are you, sir?
How you doing, dear brother? God bless you. It's an honor to be on your show.
Doing pretty good, pretty good. Okay. So, first of all, just tell the people a little bit about your background, who you are, where you come from, that kind of thing.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm a country boy. I'm from a large family. I'm a native of Wadesboro, North Carolina, which is 50 miles east of Charlotte. Born in a family of 14 children, 10 boys, 4 girls. So we had enough for our own basketball team, first and second string, and cheerleaders. So I'm from a large family. Very religious background with my parents. Very, we were very closely knitted. Grew up in what I would like to call the village. Everyone talks about it takes the whole village to raise one child. But over the years, we've seen the deterioration of that village. I think I would like to say my family and my brothers, my siblings, we are products of the village where people cared about each other, where people loved not just their own children, but they kind of took care of everybody in the neighborhood. My father often worked as a minister, pastor. He traveled a lot. He was off the call during revival, and it took him away from our home a lot. So it left a lot of us there with mother if we did not go with him. And of course, that meant mother did not have to worry like some mothers today who have to go out and work in 2 or 3 jobs and leave their children. My mother had the support of the community. And so one thing I've noticed about this generation, which I think we should talk about from time to time, and put some strategies together on how we must rebuild that village that loved each other, even when our parents had to be obligated to some other situation. I'm from a large family. 14 children, 7 of us went to Livingstone College.
Mm-hmm.
One of my best, my favorite honors, not because I care that much about awards. I care more about the work that needs to be done. But in 2022, I was inducted into the United Negro College Fund and Livingstone College Hall of Fame, Leadership Hall of Fame. That meant a lot because I put more time into trying to be real within the community where I live. I've been, of course, awarded by various organizations, and I appreciate all of that. But the key is, I think my philosophy is more like Ella Baker's. And she believed that, we must build from the ground up. And a lot of times we're more concerned about what the people at the top of the socioeconomic totem pole think about what we do, more so than the people we actually live around in our community. So I'm hoping that at some point, I'm going to get a little quiet now and let you ask a question. But I'm hoping that what I do, as far as my background is concerned, and the positions I've held, those things have made me a better person and more conscious of reaching out to my neighbor. And the greatest scripture in the what Jesus referred to as the greatest scripture the greatest law is that not only that we love God with all our heart, minds, and souls, but we love our neighbor as ourselves.
I see. Okay. And you mentioned that growing up, I guess you all were very religious. Your father was a pastor, I guess, of a church or whatnot. Is that what
Correct.
drove you into the ministry as well, or?
Yeah, I could probably say I had some influence with my seeing my father. We grew up in the church. Sometimes, as a child, you go through different phases of life. I can remember, like at 9 years old, the teacher had us to write on what we wanted to be when we grew up. And in fact, it was a part of a Christian institute for the summer where the children would come together in one section and the adults would be in the other section. And I wrote, I would like to be a great minister about like my father. That's what I wrote at that time, not knowing that I would ever actually go into the ministry, but somehow roads led back to that particular thing. And I'm one of the only siblings of the 14 who actually went into the ministry, although we were all impacted by the religious upbringing and the closely knitted community. But I am the one who, of course, went into the ministry in our family. And I would like to say, I probably think that does have some, that did have something to do with it. But more importantly, I think I have my own personal calling based upon my community work and my purpose for being or living in this particular society. I believe as a part of my calling, it was meant for me to give back to my community. The scripture talks about to whom much is given, much is required. We were not given a lot of wealth,
Right.
but we were given a lot of love and a lot of spiritual wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in giving that type of spiritual wealth and family commitment and that cooperation, community cooperation, it inspired me to want to do it in a different way, in a larger level.
I see. Okay. So now that you're older and you, like you said, you have a lot of siblings and whatnot, are you all close as a family still years later?
Yes, we are. We're very close. Sad to say, I've had three siblings to predecease me. One uh, one died when I was 3 years old, around 3 or 4 years old. That was in 1963. He was 18. I was about three. One also died when I was about 15 years old. He was 20. And then the last one who died of my siblings was in 2007. He was 67. I eulogized his funeral, my mother's, my father's, almost all the family members that I was old enough to eulogize. The family gave me the honor of eulogizing my siblings. Very difficult. In fact, it was very hard. In some sermons I had to cry halfway through the funeral
Mm-hmm.
while I'm speaking. But it was so important to me to be able to stand there and testify to the greatness of that particular sibling in a way that people would not, or a regular pastor would not have been able to do. And so yeah, we're very close. My siblings are close. We also have a little group we call the Gatewood Brothers, where we actually sing. In fact, my brother Aaron, who predeceased me in 1975, I was 15, he was 20. Aaron, he was like the leader of our religious group. Aaron was like our family is so large that the older siblings, some we didn't really get to know that well. Some of them moved out while some of us were growing up. So the older siblings, amongst the first seven of those, they were not. We were not seeing them as much as we saw those latter siblings. I'm the 12th child of the 14,
I see.
so I saw more of the younger ones, and Aaron was somewhat in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and he took the younger ones, the younger guys, and formed a gospel group called the Gatewood Brothers.
Cool.
And so, uh, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
when he died, of course, it caused us, as we were simultaneously growing up, going our different ways. Some were going off to college, some were going off to, live as a young adult. So we kind of broke up as we went. But recently, we've come back together, and sometimes we'll cut a tune here and there. In fact, we have a singing. We're going to be on a program coming up over the weekend. So from time to time, we get together. So we're very close. We work together where we can. I'm one of the ones who kind of left the flock as far as moving away. I have one other brother who lives in the D.C. area, but most of my siblings are in the Wadesboro, Charlotte area. Most of them are in the Charlotte area, in that, so that I kind of miss them a lot because a lot of my work took me out of my native home, and I've been pretty much, as you've seen me, probably working in various parts of the state.
Right. I see. Okay. So it sounds like education was a big thing or whatnot with you all growing up as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's so interesting. My father was actually a sharecropper. Much of that happened prior to my getting to know him as well, because you have to realize again, some of us younger children, we got to experience something that the older ones did not experience, and vice versa.
Hmm.
So some of them saw my father doing sharecropping and all that. They had to really just, which I would consider sharecropping is just a step up, or right in the kinship of slavery.
Hmm.
And so by my father doing that, some of them saw him in that perspective, and you would never have thought that he was going to be so strong on education.
Right.
He did, of course, graduate. I don't think my mother graduated from high school, but she also, because she became such a housewife, and during that time where people younger, a lot of times the women were married a lot younger, and a lot of times they were putting so much time into family. Education sometimes had to be put on the back burner. But with that said, my mother was a very educated woman through self education. My father became educated through basically, you know, theological training and so on and so forth. And they took a high interest in making sure their children uh, had some form of education. Every child in our family had some form of post education.
I see. Okay. Now, years later, you become part of the NAACP.
Hmm.
What attracted you to the NAACP? I guess you need to, I guess, like clarify or tell me
Hmm.
about your organizing, and community related stuff before you became part of the NAACP. What was that like for you? How did that work?
Cor- Correctly. Well, again, I actually was introduced to the NAACP as a child. Two of my older siblings, unfortunately, the one who predeceased me in 1975, Aaron, he was like the vice president of the Anson County Youth Council, NAACP. My brother Joseph, who was like a year older than Aaron, he was president of the Anson County Youth Council in NAACP. So as teens, these guys were like young leaders in our community, and a lot of times I'm looking over their shoulders while they're organizing protests at school. They had a major walkout because of the fact my brother Joseph was in a fight with a white gentleman at his school. He was suspended, and the white student was not suspended. So they put together this big protest where they walked out of school. Most of the black students walked out of school because they had just started desegregation around this time. And I'm watching them playing this march and everything. I was like in the fifth grade at the time, so I could not participate in the march because it was going on at the high school. I was at the elementary school, but I was just so inspired about what they were doing. And a lot of times they would attend the NAACP meetings. I'm sitting there, would rather be playing basketball or something like that. But as I heard the issues continue to ring in my ear and certain people complaining about some of the racism that was taking place, as I'm listening and learning about, maybe I should be doing more. And so oftentimes during the time I was in grade school or whatever, anytime we had to do a book report, I would do it on civil rights activists, whether it was Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., Medgar Evers, or whatever. I would usually, if I was given the option of being able to choose whichever topic I wanted, it would usually be on civil rights or civil rights activists.
Hmm.
So that's when I started actually getting into it. So when I left home and went to Livingstone College, I did not participate that much in the community in Salisbury. But when I came home, when I left school, uh, once I found my beautiful wife, Odessa Burnett Gatewood, which we married in 1988, we actually moved to Durham. And one of the things upon moving to Durham, I asked my cousin that took me in for the first 2 weeks before I actually had my own place. The first thing I asked her, could she get me an NAACP membership card? She went out, of course, and brought me one back. And the rest is history. I filled out my membership card, turned it back into the Durham NAACP office. And when the Durham NAACP president at that time, it was James Black, who was in Durham around 1992. By this time, around 1992, I was asked if I would be willing to join the Zeta committee of the NAACP. I was a very young guy, the youngest guy probably in the organization as far as the Zeta committee was concerned. I was asked if I would chair the economic committee because I had started this nonprofit. Of course, I wasn't trying to seek any grants or anything, but I had started a nonprofit organization called EEE, the Establishment for Economic Equality. And my goal or my objective was to bring more attention back to the need to support black businesses and watch how we spend our money, because our money seems to be going outside of our community on a one-way ticket and not coming back to support the issues that we had in our community or build some type of economic capital. Simultaneously, I'm also living in Durham now, and I'm learning the history about the Black Wall Street and all those types of things, and how the Haiti community or the Haiti community was basically robbed of its resources through the fact that a highway was driven down through the black businesses, Highway 147, unlike in Tulsa, where the racist whites came in and actually bombed and murdered and massacred the Tulsa in Oklahoma. The Black Wall Street in Durham was more strategically destroyed through politics or politricks, and they used the so-called urban renewal, which we refer to as urban removal, to strategically wipe out those businesses. And so I was there on the backside. I never really saw Haiti in action because I wasn't living in Durham at that time. But by learning that history, it made me become very interested in the community. So after becoming a part of the economic committee in 1992, I told the president that I wanted to run for president the next term, which would have been in 1994. Mm-hmm. And they thought I was crazy. They're like, what? You just got here, you're a young guy. You know, you haven't been a vice president or anything. You want to run for president? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, you know, what does the rules say? So once I learned the Constitution of the NAACP, the only requirement that I run for president was that I be a member 30 days prior to the election. Of course, that changed a little bit. Now I think it's 160 days prior to an election. Mm-hmm. But after reading that, I just prepared to run for president of the Durham NAACP. And it became, you know, the rest is history. It was a serious campaign, probably one of the biggest campaigns Durham ever had as far as an NAACP election. So I think 200 people probably showed up to vote in Durham for this election. It was unheard of. We actually did a campaign where I knew I was going to have to expand the electorate. In other words, like Barack Obama. Obama knew if he ran for president and he had to depend on the votes that currently existed, he was not going to win. The same with me. I knew I had to go out and get new members of the NAACP, go out into the what people might refer to as the hood or the neighborhood, and places where people are not stuck on tradition and all these other things. We had to actually go out in the community. And as a part of my campaign to run for Durham NAACP president, we actually recruited over 125 new members of the NAACP instantaneously to bring them in so that they would be able to vote. And people had not seen anything like that. And had these big signs on the side of the road as if I was running for Congress. Gatewood for NAACP president. They couldn't believe, like, what in the world is going on? You know, and so we really took it seriously. But it took all of that to win because, again, I was totally underdog. There were people inside the organization who were trying to stop me from winning because they had no control over me. They didn't know who I was. I was not a product of the institution. I was not validated by the gatekeepers. I'm this young independent activist. In fact, I think it might have been the secretary at that time, someone inside the NAACP sent letters to all of the members saying, do not elect Gatewood because he is a black radical and he would have our charter taken. So this is the type of stuff they were trying to do to stop me from running. And I actually ended up, by the end of the election, they said both of us had 94 votes each. Then later they came back and said 2 of my votes were not on the membership roster. So My opponent won, of course, who was Alice Mitchell at the time, because the president he through default he was disqualified to run. So I ended up running against the first vice president, who was Alice Mitchell,
I see.
and and so the thing about it is so they ran, but we challenged that the idea that I was tied and that two of my votes did not win. We actually filed a complaint with the national office after we realized that a lot of our members who went to vote, or the people who signed up became new members who went to vote for me, they would turn around, told that their names were not on the membership roster. We had to follow the procedure at NAACP to file a complaint of voting irregularities
Mm-hmm.
and let them know what had happened. They had affidavits sent in uh, to the national office for people who actually tried to vote for me and they were not allowed to vote. They called for a new election in my favor, and
Mm-hmm.
of course, the second time I ran, we won. And
Right.
so it was a big deal for a young person to come into the NAACP like that and actually win the election against the old guard. I hate to refer to people as old guard, but as the people who were pretty much supporting by the traditionalists and not really open at that particular point for a younger person coming in and being a leader.
I
And
see.
so it was a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, because
Yeah,
I'm curious. Okay, so you actually ran like it's a second time, and you actually won the second time. Then a new problem, crept up. A new situation, was laid out on the table. Can you talk a little bit about that and to bring us, I guess,
yeah,
currently where we are now?
yeah. So again, and just so you know, the second time I ran, it was all within the same period. What happened is the National WCP declared that election where it appeared as if I had been defeated. They
Mm-hmm.
wiped that election off the board, and I was given the opportunity to run again. So all that happened in about 1995. This was a 1994 election. By 1995, I was in office, and that, of course, came shortly after I had what we called the 1,000 man march against violence and self hatred, where we had actually 1,000 men to show up in the cold because of the fact of a shooting that took place in Kew Gardens that I spearheaded this march called 1,000 Men Against Violence and Self Hatred.
Mm-hmm.
And then 1995, all that came together, and became president all in the same year. So all that happened, and of course, as I came into office, what we did, we wanted to make changes. And so, not being a traditionalist, I first questioned why was all our meetings in the church. So what we did was we moved our meetings around. We started having meetings in the homeless shelter. We would have meetings in certain neighborhoods that were considered high crime areas. We would have meetings in parks. So that was the first thing I started doing as far as tearing down some of the tradition that we had in the NAACP. I started getting attention from people from across the state, and so the president at that time was Kelly Alexander Jr. And he wanted to know. Well, and of course, we ended up becoming president of the year, branch of the year. My first year started getting the accolades to come in, and we were getting a lot of attention from around the state. So I was appointed to be the chair of the. I think at that time, my first position on the North Carolina NAACP was I was kind of like seeing over marches and what we refer to as direct action. So that was the first thing that I was appointed to. I think that was in 1996. But then I went on to serve another. I'm going to just speed up the pace, take you fast forward. I went on to, I ended up moving to Oxford, North Carolina. We left Durham in 2003. So, of course, I could not be president of Durham while moving to Oxford. So, of course, I resigned from my position as the Durham NAACP president in 2003, moved to Granville County. Uh, and I was actually elected to second vice president in 2005 at the same time. Reverend William Barber, all those guys, we were elected at the same time. He was elected president. I was elected second vice. Carolyn Q. Coleman was first vice. And so we had this big administration that came out really kicking. People were really excited about our working together. And oftentimes people refer to me and Reverend Barber as the dynamic duo. It was like we were out here, really stirred it up around 2006. We created this initiative called HK which is the acronym for Historic Thousands on Jones Street. And Historic Thousands on Jones Street was basically a coalition that we built through from the North Carolina NAACP to address legislative issues. And the reason why I refer to it as HKOJ or on Jones Street is because the General Assembly is located on Jones Street, where the laws are drafted and where the laws are passed. So that was a part that ended up becoming my baby. I was at that time right away I was put in to serve as not only second vice president, but to be the chair of the mobilization committee for HK And so, and as time went on, I was actually hired full time to serve as the HK coalition coordinator. And of course, and through that position, God blessed me. I mean, we were very successful. We were mobilizing people by numbers that had never been seen in North Carolina. And a lot of people saw Reverend Barber out front, but a lot of times they did not know that I was working in the back as this organizer with HK and whether it was Moral Money or whatever. We had this coalition, a powerful coalition that, all we had to do was decide on a date. And we had a system where we could mobilize the people out into the streets like people had never seen before. And so as this went on, by 2017, William Barber decided that he was going to resign from the North Carolina NAACP presidency and move on to start his own organization, which had already started prior to resigning. I think one was the repairs of the breach, and repairs of the breach, I think he was starting Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. So those two things that Barbara started working on, and he said he was going to resign from the NAACP in May of 2017. Of course, during that period, I had become very well known across the state by this time because of the marches. People saw me right beside Reverend Barber working. And a lot of people on the inside felt like a lot of times I was, not really receiving a lot of the credit, which I wasn't really concerned about the credit. I wanted people to receive justice. And receiving the justice was enough for me. However, when Reverend Barber said he was going to step down in May of 2017, it left a vacancy, a leadership vacancy. Also, at the same time, the North Carolina NAACP was seeking an executive director so the executive director is kind of like the paid person who runs and operates the North Carolina NAACP. The state president, on the other hand, kind of like chairs the committees of all the volunteers, and also the executive director works under the president. So both those positions became available. Interestingly, a person that I had pretty much recommended should be terminated from the position that she was holding. That person arbitrarily comes up and suggests that I am harassing her at work. Mm. And that was the first allegation, that it was a workplace harassment. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. Sure. And so most of us knew why this was coming up now. Mm-hmm. Is because they knew that I had a great chance of filling either one of those positions, president or executive director. And they also knew that I was very independent. I didn't have any permanent friends, any permanent interests. Any permanent enemies. I had a permanent interest, and that interest was justice. So I didn't owe anybody anything. Mm-hmm. So these untimely false allegations were basically frowned upon by a lot of people, including myself, of course. And so what happened, unfortunately, is the Barber administration did not just handle these allegations in a way that our Constitution would call for, or human resources would call for. Human resources would basically just call upon anytime there are any allegations, something like that. They are expeditiously handled right away. Right. And right away, you would try to provide what we refer to as a fair and impartial form of due process. Okay. But that didn't happen. The thing just dragged and dragged and dragged. And I think, along with the person who made the allegations and some who wanted to weaponize the allegations, they came together and saw this as an opportunity, because they knew if I became the president of the NAACP over the person that Reverend Barber wanted to be the president, and I didn't know why he wanted that person to be president until some more things came out later down the road about financial malfeasance and all kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I was not aware of all that. Mm-hmm. All I know is I decided to run for today's president. People were really excited about it. Here comes these false allegations. But at that point, they had not been made public. Mm-hmm. So in the so-called investigation was supposedly taking place, it just dragged and dragged and dragged and dragged. Never really, no one knew what was going on. They were not being transparent. It did not go through the executive committee or the personnel committee as people thought it should. There was just like a few people who were close to the person that I would be running against. It was like they pretty much had control of the so-called investigation. And so that put us at a disadvantage. It wasn't like the first vice president knew what was going on, who was also on the national board, who was Carolyn Coleman at the time. It's not like the second vice president knew what was going on. It was a few people within the organization that just held these cards down and basically looked like they were waiting to play the cards when they felt like they needed to, in a way that was political opportunism. So what happened is my name never showed up on the ballot for 2017. I was never given a reason as to why. Mm-hmm. And so we, of course, started questioning it. Some people who were supporters of mine started questioning the administration as to why my name was not on the ballot, because they knew I had put my name in to run for president. We could not get an answer. And so ultimately, 2017 went by. I didn't run, and my name wasn't on the ballot. And of course, Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman ended up becoming president. Of course, he ran against a lady who was out in Raleigh, but they didn't put my name on the ballot, and they never explained why. Mm-hmm. So 2019, what I heard through the grapevine in 2017 is maybe the Durham NAACP branch, which I was a member of, but I had no control as a part of the executive committee because I left Durham and become, I was a resident of Oxford. So I wasn't working inside the Durham branch, but the rumor was maybe the Durham NAACP was not eligible or within what we refer to as compliance. And if the branch that you are associated with, whether you're part of the executive committee or not, if you're a member and if you run in the branch that you're associated with is not in compliance, then you're not considered to be eligible to run. But we never had anybody to explain that to us. Mm-hmm. So we could only assume. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, so that year went past, that term went past. Spearman was elected president. Mm-hmm. And so by 2019, I had moved again. Mm-hmm. I moved to Burlington, North Carolina, where I am now. Mm-hmm. When I moved to Burlington, Brother Clement, I really had no interest in running for local office here. I just moved in. But these beautiful people started approaching me and just asking me, if I would consider running for local office. Mm-hmm. They were saying to me, they wanted me to run for president. I said, well, I haven't been here long enough for that. But, they said, well, if you could fill a vacancy, the Constitution allows us to appoint and vote for people who fill a vacancy if a person didn't run at the time of the actual election, which is true. So the president, of course, ran, but no one ran for vice president. So after the election was over the following year, they appointed me as vice president. And once I was appointed as vice president, I'm talking about Alamance County now in Burlington, mm-hmm. Then that allowed me to become president because the president actually resigned with hopes that I would be his successor. And the way the Constitution is written, it becomes automatic. The vice president will move up based upon if you have more than one vice president, they'll move up into rank automatically and once the president leaves. And so I was elected to the president of Alamance County, all in 2019. So now I'm in a branch, Brother Clement,
Mm-hmm.
where they are in compliance. So it's no question this time when I run for state president, there's no question. I'm in a branch in compliance. I'm a life member. So I should be eligible and there shouldn't be a problem. So I run, and just weeks before we got to the election, brother, here come these people with this so-called, again, these allegations. This time they have the so-called completed report, which I never saw. Never saw an investigative report. They put that all out in the media weeks before, not weeks, but well, less than 2 weeks before the election. When they saw I was winning,
Mm-hmm.
some of those same people, including Reverend Barber, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
went out into the media and did everything they could to destroy me.
Mm.
And so, because they saw I was winning the election, and now we are finding later that we have over $1 million that's unaccounted for. We started around 2013 up into 2019. Those years, uh, those administrations, Barber administration and the Spearman administration, they were not being transparent. They were not submitting their monthly reports to the National NAACP. They were not getting the audits they were supposed to have been getting. And by me moving from second vice president to actually an officer, I was no longer a part of the executive committee meetings where I could challenge or hear some of the internal things that would be going on. As a staff person, we have a constitution which says that you cannot be a staff member and on the executive committee simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting now news, still getting news about some of the horrors of what was going on as pertains to our finances. And that would provide an ulterior motive for the people who came out into the news media and tried to stop me, because one of my platform items was that I was going to have an audit day one of my administration.
Mm-hmm.
And that was amongst other things, of course. I was going to address police misconduct, going to address, you know, mass incarceration. I'm going to address what's going on in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had that part in there as well, not even knowing how people who were, I guess, misusing our funds or not being responsibly accountable for our funds would be slapped in the face by me saying that on day one, I was going to call for an audit. And I believe they were willing to weaponize these allegations to stop me. And that's where we are now as a part, because we had the different debates on, I think it was on September 15th. I went to Greensboro. We had our first candidate forum, September 15, 2019. And I got there was so many cars there. I was like, oh my God. And I'm on the home turf of the president. At that time, Spearman, of course, is from Greensboro. Of course, now, he's the late Spearman, because he ultimately committed suicide in 2022.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
But at that time, man, I'm like, oh, I was nervous because I said, man, this is the place where I'm on Spearman's home court, and I'm seeing all these cars as I drive up. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're probably just Spearman supporters. Mm-hmm. So when I went in, I presented my platform. Man, people were applauding almost every other sentence because they could see my platform was so needed to work at the grassroots of the community and to save us from what is going on across our state. They did not care that I wasn't from Greensboro. They were applauding, a lot of times standing up while I'm speaking. So I already knew from that, I said, I'm going to win this election. Mm-hmm. I got it. Mm-hmm. But this was on September 5th, 2019. Mm-hmm. I mean, September 15, 2019. Mm-hmm. By September 18, 2019, out in the community with some of the Spearman supporters making these allegations with a news conference.
Right.
But when they did that, it did not hurt me one bit. People were calling me, wanting to know more. How could they come and support me? Because they knew that that was like a character assassination attempt on me.
Right.
And so we were getting more support.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when they found out that that didn't hurt me, then out comes Reverend Barber on September 25th of 2019 with the accuser holding a press conference. And everybody knew it was just such a low, below the belt move. But unfortunately, the National NAACP responded by suspending my membership.
Interesting.
So they suspended my membership, and that automatically took me off the ballot.
Yeah.
So when they took me off the ballot, we had some members who were so upset, they got a bus and they went to Baltimore, the national office. And they they took the people up there. They had a complaint they had filed against Reverend Barber, Spearman, and others in the NAACP who they felt did a dirty job and tricks, and who also I think they mentioned some of those points that they never got an audit and all these other things, and that they felt was somewhat the ulterior motive behind a lot of this. But I was out, and so the National NAACP, the only thing they did was after the people went up there, they did stop the election because one of their demands was that they not hold the election until I had a hearing. And they did stop the election, but they never gave me a hearing to 2 years later. And even after giving me the hearing 2 years later, they still never released any findings or decision. So it's just been stuck in the mud. And so that's where we are now. And of course, later on, after since the girl had Barbara out there, acting like he was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, I guess she felt like she had grounds for a lawsuit. So she went out and filed a lawsuit by February 2020 against me and the NAACP. And so, because I guess she felt like she had enough people on her side, even though she was being untruthful, she felt like she had the support. So she started coming forward, even in a more aggressive manner. Right. So that's where we are now. So we have a pending lawsuit that came from her that's been pending since February 2020. And that goes to show you that I can't talk a lot about the specifics in the case.
Right.
But it does tell you how we got to where we are, and more facts are coming out against those administrations who, you might have just seen a recent article where it showed that the person who was recently it won the election as treasurer of the North Carolina NAACP in 2021. See, they didn't even hold the 2019 election. They stopped the whole election, did not hold a hearing or anything. And so the 2019 election never did occur, or that I was in the process of winning.
Right.
But in 2021, 2 years later, and they allowed Spearman to just come back and run and stay as president. They didn't even hold any election. But if they had done what the Constitution, we think, would have said, they would have held a hearing, gave me the opportunity to be heard, let the facts be heard,
right,
and then make a ruling.
Right.
Just that simple. And then once they made that ruling, they could have done that because the Constitution actually says that in the event of someone being suspended without a hearing, then that person has the opportunity to require for a timely hearing. And upon request, the hearing, based upon the Constitution, a panel will be gathered within 60 days or as soon as possible.
I see.
Now, here we are 2 years out of the pocket, and still nothing from the NAACP hearing panel.
I see.
Which is appalling. So anyway, so that's where we are, and again, a lawsuit that's been pending since 2020. So
I see.
February 2020 would be 4 years. In fact, we already know the chances are that the case will not even be heard before 2024. Of
I
course,
see.
I have an attorney and all that good stuff,
Hmm.
and we have a lot of support. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how frivolous or how false allegations are, I am an advocate of due process. In other words, I always want the victim to be heard,
Hmm.
and I also the alleged victim to be heard. I also want the alleged perpetrator to be heard.
Hmm.
In fact, the due process system is what my ancestors basically died for and fought for. When we talk about the, the Fourth Amendment, we're talking about the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, which calls for due process, equal protection under the law. Whether we're talking about the 14th Amendment, which of course also calls for due process. I've always just wanted due process anytime any allegations have been made. And the reason why I felt it was such a slap in the face to us in civil rights for there to be a press conference held to try to stop the election and put the allegations out there in the press is because those are the tactics of the lynching mobs. That's what they did.
Right.
They'll make an allegation, especially an emotionally charged allegation, such as something sexual,
Hmm.
and they would take it out there and put it in the media. And what they would do is they would demonize or try to convict the person in the court of public opinion.
Hmm.
And then once they convict the person in the court of public opinion, using the media to demonize that person that's been accused, then they would have support for the lynching.
Hmm.
And people would be out there cheering while
Right.
they're lynching an innocent person.
Right.
And that's the way the lynching mob works.
I
But
see.
us in civil rights should always demand, regardless of what Me Too or someone else says,
Hmm.
once you make a statement, there has to be due process. And if we lose that, it's just more war on black men and other black people who are oppressed.
Hmm. Okay. Well, if you let me cut in here for a second, I was going to ask the young lady that actually accused you of sexual harassment. What was her actual position, or what was her job and stuff there at the NAACP?
She came in when I was she came in as a temporary employee to serve as a youth organizer. What happens is, as a part of HKMJ that I explained to you, we have various categories of people that we try to mobilize.
Hmm.
Her job was to come in and focus on helping to mobilize youth. She had about a 3 weeks contract.
Hmm. I see.
Um, After about that third week, when I saw that her contract was not, uh, she was still there and her contract had expired,
Hmm.
I wrote a letter to, the people informing them, including Barbara, that her contract had
Hmm.
expired. And also as a part of that memo, this was in February before she made any allegations.
Hmm.
And this was in February saying to them, if you're planning to give this person or renew this contract, I mentioned her name and the name of another staff person
Hmm.
that I would like to talk to you about my observations regarding their performance.
I see.
Right. And so this is the same person that ultimately came back in May making allegations against me when they saw that I was probably going to be the president or I might be the executive director.
Mm.
And so, but anyway, but that's how that was. She was first hired temporarily.
Right.
And then of course, after I raised my voice about the job performance that I had observed, which I thought to be somewhat non-existent,
Hmm.
then of course um, my concerns were ignored,
Okay.
and and those people were given extensions on their contract,
Wow. Okay.
and so, but they knew again that could all change with a new supervisor and a new president,
I
and
see.
so all of this was pretty much self-explanatory in how the ulterior motives would work.
Okay. And my other question was actually, who was the treasurer, during those periods in which all of this came up or whatnot? Who was the treasurer at that time?
Yeah, the treasurer at that time was a woman by the name of Daphne Holmes Johnson. Unfortunately, she has also predeceased. Uh, In fact, ironically, we've had deaths kind of hitting the top North Carolina NAACP former and past administrations, which in a year's time we lost the first vice president of North Carolina NAACP, which is Carolyn Q. Coleman. We lost the former treasurer of the North Carolina NAACP, the person that you're referring to, because she served for about 2016 to about 2019. Daphne Holmes Johnson. You saw the horrific death of T. Anthony Spearman, the former president, who later has been confirmed that he committed suicide. I think the head of security for North Carolina NAACP, Mr. Frank Jones, he died within the same period. Unfortunately, we are now mourning the death of our beloved secretary, Alan Manson NAACP, who her leadership was so strong that North Carolina NAACP felt it. And so there's a lot. And the first vice president who replaced the death of Carolyn Q. Coleman recently had a stroke. So she's recovering from a stroke. It's been about 6 months now since that happened. So there's a lot going on within our tenure. Of course, now, next thing about it is, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the treasurer who was elected in 2021, at the same time the first woman president was elected, Maxwell, Sister Deborah Maxwell, the first woman president, was elected in 2021. But a part of her administration came this gentleman by the name of Gerald Givens, who was also elected the treasurer at the same time, and of course the secretary, Sylvia Barnes. Those two people were suspended. I mean, that's not anything new now. I mean, but it's out there all in the news that they were suspended, those two individuals. And again, the red flag is Gerald Givens is one of the people who were pretty much, once he was elected, he was digging into that money, finding out where it went as a part of being the treasurer. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting. Now he's been suspended, and people are still now wondering why he was suspended. Mm-hmm. And the secretary also. Now, of course, some of the people in the national office are claiming, well, they were not doing what they were asked to do. Mm-hmm. But what we do know is that, based upon what we've heard, they were following the Constitution, which requires them, if they're in spending or expenditures, that they go through what we refer to as the executive committee. The executive committee is like the board. Mm-hmm. But it's like they were being requested, I think, by some representatives of the national NAACP to make some expenditures that they did not agree with and had not had approval from the actual board. And so some I think disagreements occurred through that and led to their suspension. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting of what's going on here. And there's a lot of red flags out there, which I think the solution is that we need to look and see what is actually going on in the national NAACP. National NAACP leadership, unfortunately, has not consistently carried out the rules that they pertain to the NAACP Constitution. Because, first of all, if they did so, I would have never been suspended. Right. Someone just made an allegation. No evidence whatsoever, no evidence to this day. Mm-hmm. They made an allegation against me. I had not violated the Constitution. So the wrongdoers ended up feeling like they got a victory out of that by having me suspended. Mm-hmm. And when in fact, if the Constitution, I think, would have been followed, it would be clear that I never did anything to violate the Constitution and therefore should have been allowed to go ahead and go through the election. Mm-hmm. Because even now, had I been allowed to serve, there's still been no evidence to show that I've done this. First of all, because it's false, but secondly, because the process was stopped when they went out into the media. Mm-hmm. And then what they did, they stopped the hearing process, stopped the complaint process, lawsuits were filed, all this other crazy stuff. And one thing the Constitution states that, and this is an international law,
Mm-hmm.
We are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.
Mm-hmm.
And so the court of law never occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are 4 years later, and there's been no court of law. And so all this time, when there's been no court of law in the United States of America, a person is, especially if there is no direct, and like in this case, there's no direct evidence,
Mm-hmm.
there's no physical evidence,
Mm-hmm.
there's no confession.
Mm-hmm.
So when all these things occur, it can only be resolved in a court of law.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, some of us are being punished where there has been no court of law
Right.
to say that somebody's guilty.
I see.
I'm not guilty of any. The only crime I've ever been guilty of that's all over my record
Mm-hmm.
is that I participated in civil disobedience, protesting in certain facilities. I was not given the permission to protest,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
protesting for civil rights.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's my crime.
I
And
see.
so I have plenty of those.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing else in my record. And there's nothing that's otherwise been out here that would say otherwise that I've committed anything beyond those crimes.
Right.
And so that's the problem we have. And I just wish the NAACP and those who support the same would make sure that the national NAACP
Mm-hmm.
follows the Constitution, not only of the NAACP,
Right.
but the Constitution that we advocate for every day, the U.S. Constitution.
Okay. So I have another question now. All right.
Yes, sir.
With locally here in Durham, what's the status of operations here in Durham?
Well, again, that's interesting. Everywhere where it seems where people such as myself, who are strong advocates, very active, very visible, where we're being shut down through, I would say, shut down through malfeasance, or shut down through injustice, or shut down through conspiracy or violations of our own rules, there has been no replacement to carry forward the work, if you know what I'm saying.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
For example, I was serving as the HKLJ Coalition Coordinator. We were mobilizing people by the thousands upon thousands.
Mm-hmm.
When I was when I was suspended, there has been no real HKLJ replacement, and that pretty much movement is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly in Durham, when I left Durham and we started working on these other things, uh, Durham has been pretty much. I don't want to describe them unfairly. I can't say, but I can say this much: it's not as visible as it once was.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to take away from anyone's work, but I do know there's just been, try to get rid of certain people, getting them out. Kind of like, to me, it's like the '60s to me.
I see.
During the '60s, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover came up with this program called COINTELPRO.
Mm-hmm.
COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, basically targeted people who were serious about the work, who were making some strides and being effective. People such as Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers, people such as Medgar Evers of the NAACP, people such as Martin Luther King Jr., Angela Davis, etc. People who were actually becoming visible doing this work and who were not compromised or not validated by the media or validated by the power structure became targets.
Mm-hmm.
And as they became targets, COINTELPRO would bring somebody in. They might plea bargain. They might have somebody out there who's facing some time, a black person facing some time. They might walk up to that black person and say, look, I'll give you a break if you join the NAACP, or if you join the Black Panther Party, or you do it and report to us. And wherever you see there's some disagreement, or it could be the Nation of Islam, wherever you see where we can come in and exacerbate a particular disagreement within an organization, or put flames on it, or that would be your purpose. and bring us information where they're going to meet, what they're planning, what they're going to do, so we can be there. So I feel like if it's not an official form of COINTELPRO going on today,
Mm-hmm.
there's some type of voluntary form
Mm-hmm.
of that type of obstruction that's taking place.
I see.
And so I don't know what's going on. All I know is I've done everything I could to try to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with our God.
Yes, sir.
And everything is just happening in a way that's very suspicious, very coordinated. Uh, and I'm just praying that, you know, I just believe, really, I believe that God will have the last word. This is when it comes to this is how my faith works.
Mm-hmm.
My faith is do everything you can do. And then once you've done all you can do, then you can wait on the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some people are waiting on the Lord when they haven't done their part.
Right.
And so I think I'm trying to do my part.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I've done my part, then I can look to the hills from which cometh the help.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe God is that help. And I believe he's coming because, again, just look in the newspaper, you'll see so many things about the NAACP now that's being revealed that you would have never thought. Who would have ever thought
Mm-hmm.
that the NAACP, under great men like William Barber, would now be questioning where's over $1 million,
Mm-hmm.
or questioning the financial accountability or whether they were being transparent. The way they're out there in the front of the media just calling for voting rights, nobody would believe we were internally stopping people from voting
Mm-hmm.
or trying to tear down a candidate right before the election.
Right.
But the same people are in front of the national media talking against Republican tactics,
Mm-hmm.
which they should be.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do that, you can't have your own tactics behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's been going on. And so it's just it's a high brand of hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to do is just make sure that we do justice. And I don't like telling this kind of truth,
Right.
but ye should know the truth. It's the truth that should make us free. And we can't overlook our problems internally and think that we can just walk over our problems and go looking to the White House or go looking toward the legislative house when we're not cleaning up our own house.
That's right.
And so that's what I think part of the problem is in this particular scenario. We need to take care of our house. When we build our house and heal our house, then I think we can repair other houses.
I see. I see. Okay. So do you see the NAACP being able to, ever operate like they used to in the past, going forward?
I do, but they'll have to make me the national president. I just kidding. They'll need somebody they'll need a whole new brand of national leadership. And I think it's going to get so bad where that people will demand it. I think if we had a whole new brand of national leadership, this is an opportunity, really,
Mm-hmm.
for someone who really has their head and their heart to the ground. They come in and see the pain and the healing that needs to take place internally. This is an opportunity for someone to come in and say, look, first of all, we're not going to drive this bus forward while we still have people under the bus. We want to make sure anybody that's been suspended over the last 5 years, 10 years, or however they want to look at it, make sure those suspensions were according to the policy that's written in our NAACP Constitution. And if they were not, we want to recall those suspensions and put those people back on the battlefield. Number one, that will get thunderous applause,
Mm-hmm.
and you start seeing a difference in your community.
Okay. Because I was
the next thing.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If the national NAACP would come out and put an agenda and a vision out here
Mm-hmm.
for people to be able to see, just like Dr. King and others, they actually put a vision out that has specifics on how to deal with it. whether it was the Montgomery boycott or whether it was something else, they always had a solution as they explained the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sooner or later, that platform, I think, will rise again. I'm just trying, because to tell you the truth about it, I have every reason to sue the NAACP.
Mm-hmm.
But I am trying to refrain from that type of fight because I feel like it's a lose-lose fight.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I win the fight, which I think I can,
Right.
do I really want to? Would it might aid into the destruction of the premier civil rights organization of our time?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing everything I can to avoid suing. And we've seen all these frivolous lawsuits come against NAACP over the last 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Frivolous lawsuits just coming, bam, 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 bam. I'm sitting over here really holding some cards, but I have not tried to sue the NAACP. I've tried. In fact, I was rooting for that administration that came in into the North Carolina NAACP. Really, I could have challenged that. I said, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to have an election in 2021 and you didn't ever clarify the election in 2019?
Mm-hmm.
I could have easily challenged that. But I said, well, this is an opportunity. We get the first woman. She's running. I'm not going to say anything. She was elected. She defeated the incumbent.
Mm-hmm.
And now, we're hearing all these other things now. But my point is, I've tried to avoid the war. I've tried to fight. I've tried to avoid the fights that would keep us from winning the war.
I see. I see.
And unfortunately, brother, I've been targeted. It's clear. And
Right. Mm-hmm.
and so I'm having to try to deal with that the best I can. And again, had it not been for family,
Mm-hmm.
had it not been for fortitude,
Mm-hmm.
and had it not been for faith, I probably would be in that list of people that I was telling you are no longer here.
Right. I understand. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sitting here, like I said, just listening to everything here, and it sounds like everything to me comes down to the role and responsibility of the national NAACP to have gotten involved with this and tried to rectify the situation before it's gotten this far. So, what are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. You're right on point. Here's what the National NAACP could have done. I know it. It's not even argumentative as far as I'm concerned. Whenever the allegation was made against me, NAACP could have said, first of all, we do not want the state NAACP investigating this matter because it's an election year, and we do not want any politics in it. So, first of all, give us the let us take it and we'll investigate it. Or if we can't do that, we'll send an independent investigator to make sure that it's not anybody that's investigating this matter that's controlled by anybody in our organization. They didn't do that. That's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you want to do is you want justice. We can't keep asking for justice and we're not be willing to be providing justice for ourselves. So the first thing is making sure that it was independently and expeditiously investigated. Because I don't want young women or anybody to feel like they shouldn't come forward if they feel like they're being mistreated. I want young women everywhere to come forward when you feel like you have been mistreated, especially by an employer or supervisor or these people that are being paid and that could possibly cause a young lady to be blackballed uh, unjustly while she's being asked for sexual favors or all different types of stuff. They do not have to tolerate this. And it's not, and it's something that I will fight for women everywhere across this country. However, at the same time, we do not have to pick and choose on whether we're going to be unfair to women or unfair to men. Only thing we have to do is follow the Constitution and due process and make sure that wherever the allegation is coming, whether it's an allegation against a woman, whether it's an allegation against a man, whether it's an allegation against LGBTQ, whomever the allegation may be against, allow due process. Once due process has been done, then follow your Constitution. We have a Constitution already in place at the NAACP. NAACP has specific rules on how to handle internal matters. Like, for example, we have an executive committee. Executive committee That's kind of like supposed to be the checks and balances. But they took everything around the executive committee. They had no form of real due process because I'm looking at a darn so-called completed investigation in the news media that I've never seen about me.
Mm-hmm.
And so the executive committee hadn't seen the thing. So it's blatant. So I think the National NAACP just said, wait a minute. This guy never saw the report you guys had in the paper? Our executive committee never saw it?
Mm-hmm.
Get that mess out of the paper. And then everybody who was out there, based on our Constitution, would have had their memberships revoked. Constitution clearly states we have on the Article 10, Section 4, what we refer to as external action. Any external action which would undermine our internal work. In other words, this is a personnel matter. This is a so-called internal investigation that you want to have. You want to put the National NAACP involved. So if she files a complaint with the National NAACP, give the National NAACP the opportunity to investigate. Give the National NAACP the opportunity to hold a hearing. But if you file a complaint on Friday and then on Wednesday or a week later, you're in the newspaper, you haven't given the NAACP the opportunity to investigate what you're accusing them of doing. So the National NAACP clearly dropped the ball in this matter and allowed people to just use politics rather than policy to drive this ugly form of what I refer to as character assassination. But to God be the glory. I'm not discouraged. God is good. I'm going to keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom way. I read somewhere in the scripture where we should rejoice and be exceeding glad mm-hmm. whenever there are instances where we are, lied on, talked about, all these things done to us as we try to do the right thing. We should be exceeding glad because the Bible says, so were the prophets before us. So, and we know what happened to Jesus. Not only was Jesus lied on, right. He was put to death. Mm-hmm. He was put to death based on those lies. And so he was the victim of prosecutorial misconduct, kangaroo court. He was a victim of police brutality. He was beaten all night long. Mm-hmm. He was a victim of the wrongful death penalty that we debate about. That's why I'm easily against the death penalty. If you put Jesus to death, I know you will make a mistake. I already know that. So why am I going to be for this? That's why I'm against prosecutorial misconduct and taking people in and not providing them due process. If you did it to Jesus, I know you're going to mess up with somebody. So I can use his case as a case study as to why all of us who claim to be righteous, whether it be church folk, whether it be civil rights activists, why we should have rules, we should be consistent in following those rules and not allow because somebody else can get a big crowd and have people clapping and standing up. Then we throw the rules out the door for that particular individual because we have to remember this. Jim Jones was considered a civil rights activist. He got an attention of everybody. He was speaking out on civil rights issues mm-hmm. before he took the people off on his own island, mainly black women, black children, led them to their deaths, nearly 1,000 people. So we just have to make sure we're consistent in following our rules and not get starstruck because a certain person might strike a certain note in, how they speak. Ella Baker addressed that as well about the charismatic leader, that we should instead allow the people to organize, mobilize amongst each other. Strong people do not necessarily need strong leaders. We just need to have a strong agenda and be consistent in how we pursue that agenda.
We really do appreciate our guests who participated in this episode, and we hope you learned something that will bless your day and your life. For all who are interested in learning more about the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast, please visit www.amazon.com and order my book, The Gary Clement Radio Show, When Strong Afro-American Men and Women Stand Up. It covers everything about us and features a variety of Afro-American personalities who speak out about the importance of education and literacy in the Black community. Well, we thank you for tuning into our podcast. Please send us your email address so we can contact you when we have new releases and new episodes and new projects as well. You can reach us at gccpresents@yahoo.com. And also, if you're interested in submitting any materials or want to get in touch with us, please do so by simply sending an email to gccpresents@yahoo.com. That's G as in Gary, C as in Charlie, C as in Charlie, presents@yahoo.com. So until next time, do take care. And this is a G2 Network Media production.